All right, everyone, welcome back to another interview episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome onto the show the great award-winning, one of the longest careers in jazz piano that I know of, fantastic teacher, Laszlo Gardony. Laszlo is a fantastic pianist. If you've never checked out any of his work, I highly suggest that you do that. And he actually just came out with a brand new album entitled Sirius Play. And this is a solo piano record. And I tell you, it's been in my CD player for over a couple of weeks now. This is really some very deep music. Laszlo gets to some places that not a lot of other pianists get to. So definitely go and check that out. If you go to the website and check out the show notes, I will have links to all of Laszlo's records and especially his new one, Sirius Play. We get into talking a little bit about the album. We get into talking about his career. He grew up in Europe and then came to America to study jazz at Berkeley. And then shortly thereafter, he was named one of the faculty members at Berkeley and has been there ever since, kind of with an illustrious career and lots of students that have come to him and graduated to go on to do really, really great things. We also get into a little bit of his philosophy on teaching, and of course, my rapid fire questions at the end. We did have a little bit of technical difficulties at the end of this recording where we couldn't salvage about the last 3 or 4 minutes of the recording, so it does cut off rather abruptly. So I want to apologize to everybody for that, but I think that you will get more than enough out of this interview. So please help me welcome the great Laszlo Gardony to the podcast. All right, I want to welcome onto the podcast the great Laszlo Gardony. Thank you so much for coming on, Laszlo.
It's my pleasure, Nick. Nice to be.
I wanted to start by asking you a couple questions about how you got your start in music. I know you were born in Hungary and you started your career in Europe. When and how did you discover jazz, and did it strike you right off the bat as something that you really wanted to dive into head first?
hmm Well, the first thing I discovered, and that I was maybe 3 years old at the time, is making things up on the piano, improvisation. So that started out my love of music and my love of playing the piano. And then when I became a teenager, of course, I got interested in the progressive rock of the time, which had a lot of blues in it and even some gospel elements. So that was the next step. And then by the time I started to seriously listen to jazz records, maybe around 17 or so, it was a very natural transition to that after, playing blues for years and listening to advanced rock and roll, and also being an improviser for all my life. So I don't think it was necessarily a discovery as much as just a progression to it. So it was just a natural progression from rock to jazz. And then after that, of course, I never looked back.
Right, of course. Can you remember like maybe one of the first albums from the jazz genre that got you hooked?
Yeah, sure. There were several of them. One of them is Les McCann's Swiss movement, which really connects to my rock roots. It's being a great gospel-influenced piano playing. And then also Miles Davis's Miles Smiles, which was very, very cool at the time, I thought. And then there was an interesting album, which was sort of a crossover, a Santana album called Welcome.
Oh, cool.
Was Tom Costner, the keyboardist, produced it. And something caught me there also in a very positive way. Then, of course, I started to listen to Bill Evans, like Portrait in Jazz. It's a wonderful album that touched me deeply. Dave Brubeck was one of the early influences, also Take Five, and just the odd meters connected to things that I heard. And I think from there, of course, I went on to listen to Coltrane and Keith Jarrett and McCoy Tyner and a lot of other people that I admired.
So fast forwarding a little bit, I know you came to the United States to study at Berkeley in the 1980s. What was that transition like for you, and who were some of the most memorable people that you remember when you first got here?
Well, it was quite an interesting transition musically. I was quite active in Europe, and I played all over continental Europe, and I had a chance to share the stage with a lot of great musicians. We opened for Art Blakey's group or Jack DeJohn's group with the band I was touring with. Or Abdul Ibrahim was one of the really memorable ones I heard. What was more of adjustment is the difference in lifestyle and the
Right.
difference in survival skills that you require to have. So that took a couple of years of adjusting. But fortunately, when I got here, I had a good sense to go to Berkeley and audition, even though I was a professional musician in Europe. But I felt if I am able to get a full scholarship, that could give me some time to really up my skills as a composer and as an improviser. So I would be able to join the scene here in a more smooth way. So that's what I did. I auditioned and they gave me a full scholarship for 2 years. So I was able to finish it this way, graduate in 2 years. And during that time, I already met some great musicians. Some of them were teachers here at Berkeley, like Gary Burton, George Garzone. And then also branched out and seeked out other musicians, such as Miroslav Vitus, Dave Holland, John Abercrombie. And those were sometimes I was able to with these people I had a chance to play with or even later record with, such as with Miroslav Vitus, Dave Holland, and Bob Moses. But whether playing, jamming, talking, or recording, they were very, very instrumental in getting me started here, musically and career-wise as well.
That's great. I know one of the most fantastic things about Berkeley is that so often the students get to actually go out on tour or play gigs with a lot of the faculty that's there. Did that start happening for you almost right after you got here? Did it take a while?
Well, I wasn't touring with faculty as much, but interestingly, we did have a chance with some of the very, very talented students at the time to not just tour, but record albums. So there were some people like myself who came off the road and they were already recording in their own environment, and they came to Berkeley to further their skills. So we had a band called Forward Motion with saxophone player Tommy Smith, who later went on to play with Gary Burton. And we did several tours in Europe with that group and also recorded 2 albums. And then later, I started to play with teachers, but not at Berkeley as much as New England Conservatory, such as Laszlo, who became a great friend. He's an amazing bass player, recorded with Weather Report. Chick Corea actually was one of the founding members of Weather Report. So we started playing together, and then I took that trio in the studio with him and the drummer named Ian Froman. And that started my career as a recording artist. I basically got an offer from several record labels after we sent a tape around what we recorded. And that was, of course, very fortunate that Miroslav was in town at the time teaching at New England. He was the head of the jazz department. Same thing with Dave Holland. He came later to teach at New England, and Bob Moses, the great drummer, introduced me to him. And then this how my second album came about. So, and then I also went to New York a lot, so I met people there, and I was able to contact with Michael Brecker, John Schofield, John Abercrombie, and they were very inspiring and supportive. Dave Liebman, who also came several times to play my music with my band, also Randy Brecker. So I seeked out New York musicians and also a lot of the greats who were in town teaching at the time. Yeah.
And that's one of the best things I feel like about the proximity of Boston to New York, right? Is that it's just a short trip down the highway, and a lot of the teachers at Berkeley are based in New York, so you kind of have that connection. Did you find that really helpful?
Oh, absolutely. But see, the difference is that what the time period I'm talking about is 83 or 84. That time, much less, if any, New York musicians were teaching at Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
Gary Burton, who was an international star even by then, of course, a long-time star. But now, in the past 10, 15 years, most of the faculty is either New York based or had been living in New York for a long time. My current band, Yoran Israel on drums and John Lockwood on bass, they were New York musicians playing with, the Rolodex of the jazz greats
Right.
over there. Before they moved here. So we formed this trio 14 years ago, and a lot of my recordings are with that trio, or extended it with Don Braden on saxophone, Bill Pierce, and Stan Strickland on the last one. So, yes, now I feel the scene between New York and Boston is much closer. And Berkeley has a lot to do with it, of course.
So let's talk about your transition to actually teaching at Berkeley. I know
Mm-hmm.
after you completed your degree, I don't know what the timeline is, but how long was it between when you completed and when you started teaching? Was it right away?
Well, technically, there was 2 years between graduation and starting to be part of the faculty, because I started in '83 at Berkeley. I finished in '85, even though my graduation date is '87, because it's a 4-year program. I just finished it by testing out of a lot of things. That, of course, I went to the conservatory back in Hungary, the Béla Bartók Conservatory, and also studied to be an educator in a mathematics, physics major capacity over there. So I had a lot of education before in music and in pedagogy. So I could test out of a lot of things, but there was a gap between '85 and '87 when I made a lot of my contacts and made my first recording. So by the time Berkeley got interested in me as a teacher, I already had a record deal with Anti-Lace Records. I already won the Great American Jazz Piano Competition, which was a huge boost for my career, first prize. And then I started first with a very, very, very part-time basis, just a few hours, so I can tour, and then more and more teaching became an equal part of my time and my interest as well.
That's great.
So, yeah, it's really a wonderful thing to complement a performing career, I would say, because if you teach as honestly and as openly as you play, then the two things help each other very, very much. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very obvious to me that teaching is super important to you because you've been at Berkeley ever since, right?
Yeah, I've seen so many great people come, and so many great students, and I was able to help them to go on for wonderful careers of their own. It's very rewarding. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about your new album that just came out called Sirius Play. Tell us a little bit about the album and why you're excited about people hearing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this album is came about as my response to, I would say we are going through very trying times. These are difficult times for our nation, and I very much identify with that struggle because I've seen it back in Europe as well, and knowing and interested in history. I know what kind of dangers we are facing and how we should stay on the right path as a nation, so we remain a strong democracy and we continue to support human rights and protect the environment. So what I felt is this music should be both strengthening and also soothing, in a sense that we need both of those kind of reinforcements these days. Yes. Calm our souls and also strengthen us so we are more resilient in the face of these challenges. So the way I wanted to accomplish this is that I had some wonderful arrangements of three of my favorite jazz standards: Georgia, On My Mind, Naima, great Coltrane composition, and Over the Rainbow, Harold Allen. And then, so I recorded those, and then I also started improvising freely. I told the sound engineer, Paul Wycliffe, wonderful engineer, Grammy nominated, just turn on the recorder and let me play. So that's what I did. I played for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then short pieces, one after another. And then I selected the ones that told a story about the way I feel about things, these days. And I went very, very deep and very focused. And after all these years, I am very good at focusing myself when it matters, when you are in the studio or when you are at a concert. So I felt very, very good about the results. And I really felt that those goals were accomplished with that music. So that's the of the album. Those yeah.
So I have a question for you about what you just mentioned, something about focus. How do you get yourself into that space? Like you were talking about, you're very, very good at focusing when the time comes to really put your mind 100% into recording or playing or something like that. Do you have any advice for the listeners out there about how to get into that state and achieve that level of focus that you managed to do so well?
Mm-hmm. Well, I learned from many different sources this kind of focus. One of them was if you improvise from a very young age, that's a daily process for you to be creative. So you focus on that. And also it's a daily process to play alone at the piano. So you have to be a good two-handed pianist for that, right?
Right.
The other thing is the more you play with great musicians, a lot of challenges are thrown at you, right? Mm-hmm. And many times the only thing will save you if you really focus on that new composition you may not ever played before, or some sort of new twist where you really have to use your ear, or whatever, right? Or a new rhythm section that approaches rhythm differently. So that is a huge, huge lesson, ongoing lesson. And then also it's very important that you think and meditate on your approach to improvisation. So you don't approach it in an egotistical way. You don't really use what you know, but you really want to play what you hear in that moment. And of course, a lot of things will come out. But the point is not to think as a pianist or even as a composer. Just think as a vessel that this music is going through at this moment, and you have to keep that clean. And also be humble about what happens. So you have to be really honest with yourself. So but this one worked, this one was not as up to the level of the other thing. And when you do that over many, many years, then you develop the kind of skill that you can focus on that in the moment. I do this with my students, with my performance major students. I'm in charge of a performance major recital program at Berkeley. And to help them to play the prepared piece, what they prepare, I ask them just to start playing anything. And then I listen and join them on the second piano in my office and help them out so they can continue, so they don't get discouraged from whatever random things they start to play.
Right. And
we always develop some beautiful music, and I always make sure the shape is very musical. So we don't just randomly jam for a while and then we give up.
Right.
Something progresses there musically, but the initiative is coming from them. So even teaching like that, as I said before, teaching can be so helpful for you as a performer. It's such a beautiful challenge, of course, for the student, but it is a challenge for me too, because I have to get into their space and into their creative mind, and I have to provide them with that mindset of that focus, what I'm talking about. So all these things together for many, many years, and of course the commitment to this kind of playing, that's also very important. Because I've seen people who are good improvisers, but then they practice the wrong things because they want to feel safer,
Right.
So you can develop a bag of licks, or you can develop a certain approach that works, and then you don't deviate from that. You don't challenge yourself anymore. Those are the pitfalls to avoid. And then you can continue to be a creative artist.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you so much for that. All right, so I'm going to throw you 5 questions that I ask everybody who comes on the show. These are just quick little rapid fire questions, but don't feel like you need to be rapid fire on your answers. So the first one is, what is one educational material that you feel like you couldn't live without?
One educational material I couldn't live without. Obviously, the instrument. I think it's very important that now we are talking on Skype, right? So sometimes we tried Skype lessons with certain people, and I felt that the fact that we cannot play together in the same time, on Skype, it's very difficult to play with your student. It diminishes so much how much you can convey, because whatever you talk about and you learn, you have to experience it in practice.
Right.
So playing with with the students is very important. So you have to have two instruments, basically. I think with one instrument, it would be very hard to teach if there
Right.
would be just one piano in my office. And then, of course, the repertoire is very important. So it's very important that there are accurate charts that are
Hmm.
now more common than in 83. The
Right.
original book had so many mistakes that it was pathetic. You basically just had to rely on your own transcriptions most of
Right.
the time. And that's wonderful that it's getting there. So I think those two things, yeah.
So, who was the teacher that made the biggest impact on you and why?
Hmm. Some of the musicians I played with, I felt were the greatest teachers, and it happened live, often on my music. So people like Dave Liebman, who are just an amazingly sincere and serious musician, or Mick Goodrick. I don't know if you
Oh,
know of.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, he's just wonderful. We toured for years. We recorded an album together. So I learned a lot from them in that context. And I could say that every great musician I played with, I learned a lot from them. And then, of course, at Berkeley, what is very helpful is that everybody is very passionate about music, and there is a definite system of the Berkeley system that we started learning and also teaching. And then the more and more Berkeley developed, everybody developed their own niche and their own specialty. But to have that strong foundation, what all the Berkeley classes together gave me in 83 to 85, that was very helpful.
That's great. So, what is one thing that you make every single student work on without exception?
Well, touch and sound on the piano.
Okay.
If you don't sing on the piano, if your personality doesn't come through your fingers, then there is a problem.
Right, right. And that applies to every instrument, definitely.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly.
great advice.
Yeah.
So, what is one personal quality or characteristic that you feel makes people successful in music?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, we have to have talent, right?
Hmm.
So you have to have good ears, you have to have good technical abilities, which you can develop over time. But I think the most important thing is that in an artist's life or even a music student's life, there are these crossroads when things get hard, right? So then
Hmm.
you have to make a decision whether you continue with music or not. And it's very important that every time when in those difficult situations, you don't give up. You become a stronger musician, and your identity as a musician becomes stronger. When it gets to the point when you just know there is no choice, this is what I am. That's my 100% identity.
Hmm.
And sometimes when you play with people who haven't made these choices yet, or they are not willing at all, the music doesn't really take off.
Right,
You
right.
make those choices at those crossroads when you could go and give up or just do half way, but not with your 100% dedication. And if you are dedicated to music at those crossroads, then you grow.
All right. I want to thank Laszlo so much for coming on the show and talking to us about a variety of things. I know I definitely gained a lot by hearing some of the wisdom from such an amazing musician such as Laszlo, and I hope you benefited from it as well. So go and check out his new record, Sirius Play. You can find the link in the show notes on our website. But if you don't feel like going to our website, just simply type into Google Serious Play Laszlo Gardony, and it will definitely come up with the new record. So go check it out today, and I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you on Friday with our regularly scheduled programming. Have a great one, everybody.